Milan sat in the cockpit of his small patrol ship, watching the deep black of space stretch endlessly around him. His mission was simple. He had been assigned to scan the far edge of human-controlled territory, making sure no debris or rogue ships were drifting too close to the trade lanes. It was a quiet post, the kind most pilots considered boring, but Milan did not mind out here. The silence was peaceful. The patrol was almost over when his radar screen flashed with a sudden warning. A large mass was moving fast from the left side of his ship. Milan adjusted his seat and turned the sensors toward it. At first, he thought it might be a drifting asteroid, but the readings were strange. There were dozens of small fragments moving together, and their speed was increasing. Before he could adjust his course, the debris cloud was on top of him. The impact shook the ship violently. Milan was thrown forward against his safety straps. The sound of metal scraping and cracking filled the cabin. Red warning lights lit up across the control panel. He tried to steer away, but another piece of debris slammed into the left thruster, making the whole craft spin out of control. His heart pounded as he tried to stabilize the ship. He pulled hard on the controls, but the damage was too severe. The navigation system went offline, the engine sputtered, and then the main power failed. The ship began to drift toward the glowing curve of a nearby moon. Milan activated the emergency landing sequence, but with most of the systems dead, the ship responded slowly. The moon's surface rushed closer, the violet-colored clouds of its thin atmosphere swirled beneath him. The ship entered with a violent shake, the heat from friction making the cockpit glow with an orange light. Milan gritted his teeth and tried to guide the ship toward a flat area. The controls fought against him, but he refused to give up. If he lost focus now, he would never walk away from this landing. The crash came with a deafening roar. The ship tore through the ground, sending up dust and shards of crystal-like rock. Milan's harness dug into his shoulders and his chest, slammed against the straps. Pain exploded along his side. The left wing of the ship snapped off as it slid into a shallow canyon, finally coming to rest against a large boulder. For a moment, all Milan could hear was his own breathing. The cabin was filled with a faint haze from the impact. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his ribs, forcing him to stay still. He pressed his hand against his side and felt the deep ache of injury, a broken rib, maybe to dot with effort. He unfastened the harness and pulled himself toward the emergency supply locker. Inside, he found a small oxygen pack, a portable scanner, and a water flask. His communication device was smashed, the screen shattered into useless shards. There would be no calling for help. Milan forced himself to take slow breaths, ignoring the pain. He opened the cockpit hatch and stepped outside. The air was breathable, but thin. He kept the oxygen mask ready just in case. The sight before him was like nothing he had seen before. The moon's sky was a pale violet color, and the sun above shone through it like a dim golden disk. Towering trees made of crystal grew from the rocky ground, their branches glowing faintly in the light. The ground was uneven, made of smooth stone and patches of glittering dust. In the distance, he saw sharp cliffs and dark caves carved into the canyon walls. His first thought was to mark the crash site in case help came. He placed a bright emergency beacon on the highest rock nearby, though he knew the signal would not travel far without a functioning transmitter. After that, he took stock of his supplies. A few energy bars, some water, a small knife, and a portable heat pad. It was not much. He knew he had to find shelter before the temperature dropped. The thin air and alien landscape gave the place a strange, silent feeling. Even the wind seemed soft, as if it was afraid to disturb the stillness. Milan started walking toward a cluster of crystal trees, thinking they might provide cover. Every step sent a dull ache through his ribs, but he pushed forward. Hours seemed to pass as he searched. The shadows grew longer, and the light turned a darker shade of gold. He found a shallow cave near the base of a cliff, and decided it would be a safe place to rest for the night. Inside, the air was cooler, and the rock walls glimmered faintly, as if tiny stars were trapped inside them. Milan sat down, leaning against the wall. He wrapped his heat pad around his middle and took a sip of water. The pain in his ribs was constant, but he tried to focus on breathing steadily. His mind raced with questions. What was this place? Was anyone else here? Would he be able to survive? Long enough for rescue to find him. As he closed his eyes for a moment, he heard something. It was faint at first, like a low hum, but it grew louder. He opened his eyes and looked toward the cave entrance. A shadow moved outside, tall and graceful, shaped nothing like a human. His pulse quickened. The figure stepped into the light of the cave. It was a woman, though clearly not from Earth. Her skin had a faint shimmer, like polished stone, and her hair was the color of dark copper. She wore armor made from plates of crystal, and in her hand was a long spear tipped with a jagged blade. Her bright eyes locked on Milan, sharp and assessing. Milan's first instinct was to raise his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. But the woman stepped closer, her expression cold. She spoke in a language he did not understand, her voice firm and commanding. When he failed to answer, she narrowed her eyes and took another step forward. The tension in the air was heavy. Milan's ribs throbbed, his breath shallow. He had survived the crash, but something told him his real challenge was only just beginning. Milan stayed seated against the cave wall, his hands lifted slightly to show he was not a threat. The alien woman stood only a few steps away, her spear held at an angle that told him she was ready to strike if he made a wrong move. Her armor caught the dim light, reflecting soft shades of blue and green from the crystal plates. She spoke again in her own language, her words sharp and quick. Milan shook his head slowly to show he did not understand. The woman tilted her head, studying him with narrowed eyes. She pointed at his chest, then at the outside of the cave, as if telling him to move. Milan hesitated. His ribs hurt badly, and the thought of standing made his stomach tighten. But he could tell from her posture that refusing was not an option. He pushed himself up with one arm, using the cave wall for support. Pain flared in his side, making his breath catch. The woman noticed his slow movements and frowned. She stepped closer, speaking again in a demanding tone. When he did not answer, she reached out with the flat side of her spear and tapped his side. The touch was firm but not meant to harm. Still, the pressure made him wince. Her eyes narrowed further. She switched the spear to her left hand and suddenly drove her right knee toward his injured ribs. Not with full force, but enough to test him. The sharp jolt sent a wave of pain through Milan's body. He gritted his teeth and stayed silent. The woman's brows lifted slightly. She had expected a cry of pain, maybe even a collapse. But instead he stood there, his breathing uneven, but controlled. She took a step back, her expression changing from hostility to curiosity. Milan's instincts told him that she was testing him, trying to see if he was weak. In human training, endurance and silence were often seen as signs of strength. Maybe the same was true here. She motioned again for him to follow her, with no better choice. Milan limped forward. Outside the cave, the violet sky had deepened in color as the sun lowered toward the horizon. The woman walked ahead at a steady pace, her spear resting across her shoulders. Milan followed as best he could, keeping his eyes on the strange surroundings. The ground glittered faintly in the fading light, and the crystal trees made soft chimming sounds as the wind passed through them. In the distance, the land rose into jagged hills, and beyond that, a faint golden glow hinted at another settlement or light source. They walked for what felt like an hour, before reaching a cluster of tall crystal pillars arranged in a half circle. Between them were small shelters made from carved stone and glowing mineral slabs. Figures moved among them, tall, slender people like the woman, dressed in similar crystal armor or simple woven clothing. The moment the villagers saw Milan, the air changed, conversation stopped, eyes turned toward him, filled with suspicion. A few children peeked from behind a large stone wall, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. The woman led him toward a central open space where a large fire burned in a circular pit. Several older aliens sat around it, their armor decorated, with more elaborate designs than hers. She spoke to them quickly, gesturing toward Milan as she explained something. One of the elders stood and approached him. His face was lined with deep marks, his hair long and silver. He looked Milan over carefully, then spoke in the same unknown language. Milan gave the only answer he could, a small shake of his head. The elder's expression tightened. He turned to the woman and said something that sounded like a command. She nodded once and stepped closer to Milan, motioning for him to sit on the ground near the fire. Milan lowered himself slowly, careful of his ribs. The warmth of the fire was welcome. After the cool evening air, the villagers kept their distance, watching closely as the elder and the woman continued to speak. He could not understand a word, but from the tone, it sounded like they were debating his fate. After a few minutes, the elder gave another order, and the woman turned to Milan. She made a gesture with her hands that looked like eating. Then she pointed to herself and tapped her chest. He guessed she was giving her name, Aaron. She said clearly. Milan hesitated before pointing to himself. Milan, she repeated it, slightly mispronouncing it, but her tone had softened. She walked away briefly and returned with a small bowl filled with a thick, glowing paste. She set it down in front of him and watched as he took a cautious sip. It was warm, with a strange but pleasant taste. As he ate, Aaron crouched beside him. Her gaze shifted to his side where he had been clutching his ribs. She made a short sound, almost like a question. Milan tapped his side and gave a small nod, trying to show it was hurt. She frowned and set her spear aside. Then, without warning, she pressed the heel of her palm against the injury. Milan sucked in a sharp breath, his muscles tensing, but he did not cry out. She held the pressure for a few seconds, then released it. Her hand glowed faintly, and the warmth spread through his side. Milan realized this was not just a test. She was using some kind of healing method. The warmth sank deep, easing the sharp edge of the pain. Aaron pulled her hand back, watching his reaction closely. When he gave a small nod of thanks, she gave the faintest hint of a smile. The rest of the night passed with Milan sitting quietly near the fire. The villagers eventually lost interest and returned to their activities, though a few kept glancing at him. Aaron stayed nearby, her spear within reach, as if both guarding and watching him. When the fire began to die down, she motioned for him to follow again. She led him to a small shelter on the edge of the village, a simple space with a woven mat on the ground and a small glow crystal hanging from the ceiling. She pointed to the mat, then at him. Milan understood she was giving him a place to sleep. He lowered himself onto the mat, grateful for the chance to rest. As she turned to leave, Aaron paused for a moment, looking back at him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes seemed to hold less suspicion than before. When she finally walked away, Milan lay back and stared at the faint glow above him. The pain in his ribs had eased, though it was not gone. He thought about her sudden kick in the cave, the strange healing warmth, and the curious way she seemed to be testing him. He still did not know what she wanted from him or why she had brought him here. But he knew one thing. His survival now depended on understanding her and the world she came from, and judging by the way she carried herself. Aaron was not someone who gave trust easily. The morning light spilled across the crystal forest, turning every branch and shard of rock into a sparkling display. Milan woke slowly, his ribs still tender but more manageable than before. The small shelter Aaron had given him was simple but comfortable, and the faint glow from the hanging crystal made him feel less alone. He stretched carefully, mindful of his injured side. Every movement reminded him that he was far from home, and alone in a strange world. He had no idea how long he would have to stay here, or if he would ever leave. But one thing was clear. His survival depended on gaining at least a small measure of trust from the alien woman who had brought him here. Aaron appeared just as the first rays of sunlight touched the village. She stood silently in the doorway, her spear across her shoulders, watching him with sharp, assessing eyes. Milan rose slowly and gave a small nod in greeting. Aaron returned it briefly, then pointed to her side and motioned for him to follow. Milan limped after her, moving carefully. She led him through the village toward a central clearing, where the other villagers were beginning their morning routines. Some tended to small glowing plants, While others carried water in polished crystal containers, children played in the open spaces, their laughter light and musical. Yet, despite the peaceful morning, Milan sensed a tension under the surface. The villagers were wary of him. Aaron guided him to a low platform near the center of the village. She motioned for him to sit and then began speaking rapidly to the gathered elders. Milan did not understand the words, but her tone had urgency. One of the elders, the silver-haired man who had first questioned him by the fire, stood and gestured toward Milan. His expression was serious. Milan waited, unsure what to do. Then Aaron approached him. Kneeling beside him, she pointed toward the trees beyond the village. Then back at him. Her meaning became clear. She wanted him to follow her outside. Once outside the village, the alien warrior led him to a small clearing surrounded by tall crystal trees. Their branches reflected the sunlight, scattering colored light in every direction. Milan looked around carefully, scanning for danger. Aaron finally spoke in broken words that Milan could understand. "Danger. Comes night. Raiders. Take people." She pointed to the distant hills where shadows moved too quickly to be trees. "They steal food, children, elders." Milan's heart sank. Raiders were coming for this village, and these people seemed unprepared. He swallowed and asked, "How many?" Aaron counted on her fingers. Milan guessed there were at least 20 of the raiders, all lightly armed but fast and organized. "We can defend," he said, "if you listen." Aaron's eyes narrowed. She did not nod or shake her head, but her expression softened slightly. She gestured for him to show what he meant. Milan studied the clearing, the trees, and the hills. Then he picked up a large stick and began drawing lines in the dust. He mapped out the village, the likely paths the raiders would take, and how the villagers could position themselves. He explained as best he could, using gestures and short words. Aaron's brow furrowed, but she watched closely, moving her hands to indicate points in agreement or concerned by the time he finished. The sun was high in the sky. Aaron stood silently for a moment, then tapped her chest. She spoke slowly. "You fight, help." Milan nodded. "Yes, I fight. With you, help your people." She considered him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, small, but real. It was a smile of respect. She led him back toward the village, motioning for him to stay close to her side. Over the next few days, Milan began learning about the villagers and their ways. He discovered that they were a proud people, skilled in crafting and farming, but they were not trained for organized combat. Their defenses relied on speed and surprise. But the raiders were too strong and relentless. Milan began teaching them simple tactics. He showed them how to use the crystal trees for cover and how to create traps from fallen branches and glowing minerals. He encouraged the children to stay hidden in safe places and helped the adults organize patrols along the ridges. Aaron followed him everywhere, observing closely. She was skeptical at first, questioning every method he suggested. But as she saw the villagers practice, her doubts began to fade. Milan's ideas were simple but effective, and even small victories boosted the confidence of the people. One afternoon, while they were setting up a series of warning systems along the hilltops, Milan stumbled over a loose rock. The pain shot through his side, and he groaned quietly. Aaron turned immediately, without hesitation. She pressed her hand against the injured rib. Milan tensed, expecting pain, but instead a warmth spread through his side. He exhaled slowly, surprised at the relief. Aaron looked at him, waiting for his reaction. He gave a small nod of thanks. Her expression softened further. That evening, Milan and Aaron sat by the fire once more. The villagers had begun to treat him with cautious respect. Some brought him small gifts, glowing fruits and water in polished crystal containers. The children no longer hid when he walked by, and even the elders watched him with curiosity instead of suspicion. Aaron stayed close to him as always. She did not speak much, but her presence was reassuring. Milan realized that their strange encounter in the cave had been the beginning of something important. The kick to his ribs, which had seemed harsh and threatening, was now a memory linked to trust. As night fell, the violet sky darkened, and the stars began to shine. Milan lay on his mat in the small shelter, thinking about the coming days. The raiders would return, and the villagers would need all their courage to survive. But for the first time, he felt a sense of hope. Arn's people were strong, and together, they could face the danger. Milan knew he still had much to learn about them, and they had much to learn about him. But this unlikely truce, born of survival, endurance, and mutual respect, was the first step towards something greater. He closed his eyes, listening to the soft hum of the crystal trees outside. Despite the pain in his ribs, he felt ready for what was to come. Milan knew that the next challenge would test everything he had taught these people, and everything he had learned from them, and when that challenge came, he would not face it alone. The morning air was cool and clear. Milan limped outside his shelter, stretching carefully. His ribs still throbbed, but the warmth from Arn's healing touch the day before had eased most of the pain. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, checking the simple tools and supplies he had gathered since arriving in the village. Erin was already outside, pacing near the edge of the crystal forest. Her posture was alert, and her eyes scanned the distant hills. Milan approached her cautiously, knowing she would notice every movement. "Morning," he said softly. She turned toward him. Her expression was serious, and she gestured toward the hills. Then she pointed to the ground near a cluster of crystal trees. Milan followed her gesture and saw faint tracks in the glittering soil. They were not from the villagers. The prints were wider than a human foot and carried the marks of some sharp claws or metallic shoes. Erin spoke slowly, pointing between Milan and the tracks. "They've come soon. Raiders strong." Milan knelt to inspect the tracks. They were fresh, and he could tell that the creatures moved quickly. He traced them with his fingers, trying to estimate the number. "At least 20, he said. "Maybe more. They've been scouting." Arn's eyes narrowed. She lifted her spear and tapped the ground near the tracks. Her meaning was clear. The raiders were close, and the village was vulnerable. Milan realized that the simple patrols they had practiced were not enough. He needed a plan to protect everyone, including the children and elders. He turned to Erin. "We need to prepare traps and barricades. We can use the trees and rocks for cover. We need early warning systems on the hills." Erin listened carefully, then nodded slightly. She motioned for the villagers to gather. Milan spoke as best he could, using gestures and broken words. He showed them where the raiders would likely enter the village and how to defend the important areas. The villagers moved quickly, trusting his guidance even though they did not fully understand him. For hours, Milan and Erin worked with the villagers. They set up simple alarms using small stones and crystal shards, which would tumble and make noise if anyone passed by. They dug shallow pits hidden by branches and leaves to slow the raiders down. Milan taught the villagers how to use their simple weapons more effectively, combining speed and coordination to defend the village. By midday, the village looked more prepared. Guards patrolled the edges, watching the hills, while others kept close to the children and elders. Milan took a moment to rest against a crystal tree, breathing slowly and feeling the ache in his side. Erin approached and pressed her hand against the injured rib. The warmth spread through his body again, making the pain easier to bear. "You rest," she said. He shook his head. "I want to see the hills. Make sure they are ready." She considered this for a moment, then gestured for him to follow. Together, they climbed a small rise that overlooked the village. From this vantage point, Milan could see the surrounding hills and valleys. Shadows moved among the rocks, too small and quick to be part of the landscape. "They watch," Erin said, pointing to the shadows. Milan squinted. He could just make out several figures creeping closer. They were slender but fast, carrying crude weapons. Their movement was organized, almost as if they were scouting in teams. He counted 12 in total, but he knew more could be hidden. "They are clever," Milan said quietly. "But we can use their speed against them," said traps. "To slow them, then hit them together." Arn's lips pressed together. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She raised her hand, signaling to the villagers below. They began placing small tripwires and alarms in the most likely paths. Milan and Aaron checked each position, adjusting where needed. As the sun moved toward the horizon, the wind shifted. A distant sound carried to them, low, harsh voices and the clatter of weapons. The raiders were approaching. The villagers stiffened, gripping their tools and makeshift weapons. The children were guided to hiding spots, and the elders moved to a central safe area. Milan checked his supplies. He had his knife, a small pouch of stones, and a few basic tools. It was not much, but with Aaron and the villagers, it was enough. To make a difference, the first raider appeared at the edge of the forest, moving quickly toward the village. Milan held his breath. He could see the tension in Aaron's body as she watched him carefully. Without warning, one of the tripwires snapped, sending a small crystal shard spinning into the air with a loud chime. The raider froze, looking around. In confusion, Milan motioned for the villagers to attack. They moved with precision, coordinated and careful. One of the raiders tripped over a pit and fell hard, while another was slowed by a small net made of woven crystal threads. Milan and Aaron leapt into the fight, working together to push the intruders back. The raiders were clever and quick, but the villagers' preparation gave them the advantage. Each trap and alarm disrupted the attackers' formation, allowing the defenders to strike efficiently. Milan felt the burn in his side as he moved, but the adrenaline and focus kept him going. Aaron fought beside him, her spear flashing in the fading light. She moved with grace and precision, her attacks careful but strong. Milan realized that while he had taught the villagers basic strategies, Aaron's skill made them effective. Together, they created a wall of resistance the raiders had not expected. By nightfall, the raiders had retreated, slipping back into the shadows. The villagers cheered, some throwing their hands in the air, others hugging each other in relief. Milan's chest rose and fell as he leaned against a crystal tree, exhausted but alive. Aaron approached, her expression unreadable. She placed her hand on his side, the familiar warmth easing the ache in his ribs. Then she gave a small nod, a sign of respect. Milan returned it. The villagers gathered around, their faces glowing in the light of the fire. They had survived their first attack, and for the first time, they believed they could stand together. Milan knew that this was only the beginning. The raiders would return, and the challenges would grow more dangerous. But now, the villagers had hope, and he had allies. That night, as the village settled into quiet, Milan lay on his mat, listening to the soft hum of the crystal forest. He thought about the attack, about the skill and courage of Aaron and the villagers, and about the future. He knew that he had changed this place, but in truth, it had changed him. Milan closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came next. He knew that with Aaron and the villagers by his side, they could face any enemy. Together. The next morning, the village was alive with movement. Villagers sharpened their tools, carried small bundles of supplies, and quietly practiced movements Milan had shown them the day before. The victory against the raiders had given everyone confidence. But Milan knew that preparation was far from complete. The raiders would return, stronger and more determined. Aaron stood beside him near the edge of the village, watching the activity. Her eyes were focused, and she carried herself with quiet authority. Milan approached her carefully, wincing slightly as his ribs pressed against the harness he used to carry his supplies. She noticed and gave a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement of his pain. "We need more training," Milan said. "They will come again, and we must be ready." Aaron's eyes narrowed. She tapped her chest and then the ground, speaking in her language. Milan understood enough to know she was asking if he could teach them. He nodded firmly. Over the next several hours, Milan worked with small groups of villagers. He began by showing them how to move silently through the forest, using the trees and crystal pillars as cover. He emphasized patience and observation, teaching them to watch the hills and valleys for movement before making any noise. The villagers were quick learners. At first, they stumbled and whispered too loudly, but Milan encouraged them, demonstrating the movements himself. He showed them how to use simple tools as traps, rocks balanced to fall, branches woven together to trip someone, and small nets hidden in the underbrush. Aaron followed him everywhere, observing closely. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was to point out something he had missed or to adjust his stance for better balance. Milan noticed that she was watching not just the villagers, but him as well. It felt strange at first, but he realized she was assessing his strength and determination. As the day wore on, Milan introduced more advanced strategies. He showed the villagers how to work together, in small teams, covering each other's blind spots and moving in coordination. He taught them how to signal silently using hand gestures and small, colored crystals that reflected light differently depending on the angle. The villagers adapted quickly. Their natural agility and familiarity with the terrain gave them an advantage, and Milan's guidance made their movements precise. Even the children practiced small drills, learning to stay quiet and alert while hidden in safe spots. Aaron approached Milan during a break. She pointed to his side, then touched her own chest. Milan understood. She was offering to help with his injury. He shook his head, but she pressed her hand against his ribs anyway. Warmth flowed through him, easing the stiffness and pain. "You, strong," she said finally, her tone a mix of respect and curiosity. Milan smiled faintly. "You, strong, too," he replied, testing the words he had learned. Aaron nodded once, then stepped back to observe as he returned to the villagers. By late afternoon, Milan introduced the concept of ambushes and defensive positions. He placed small groups of villagers in different areas of the forest and hills, giving each team a specific role. Some were to distract and confuse the raiders, others to block paths, and a small team to protect the children and elders. The villagers practiced repeatedly, correcting mistakes and improving coordination. Milan watched with satisfaction. They had started as fearful, uncertain people, but now they moved with purpose and confidence. Aaron came to him later, carrying a small bundle of glowing fruit. She offered it to him without a word. Milan took it gratefully and ate a piece, feeling renewed energy. Then she pointed toward the practice area, gesturing that they should continue. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the crystal trees. Milan decided to conduct a final exercise for the day. He gathered all the villagers and assigned them to defend a small area of the forest against a mock attack. Using sticks and nets to simulate raider weapons, Milan played the role of the intruder, testing their reactions. At first, the villagers hesitated, unsure of when to act. But as the exercise continued, they grew more confident. They moved in harmony, blocking paths, tripping simulated intruders, and signaling each other. Silently, Milan could see Aaron watching intently, her expression thoughtful. Finally, the exercise ended. The villagers were breathing heavily but smiling. Milan patted several on the shoulder, praising their progress. Even the elders nodded, acknowledging the improvement. Aaron stepped forward, her eyes meeting Milan's. "You changed them," she said softly. "They're stronger." Milan shook his head. "They were strong already. I just helped them see it." Aaron considered this. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out and tapped his shoulder lightly with her palm. The warmth spread through him, the same as before, but it felt different now, a sign of trust and approval. Night fell over the village. The villagers returned to their homes, some still practicing quietly in the dim light of the crystal lamps. Milan and Aaron remained near the edge of the forest, looking out toward the hills where the raiders might appear. "You ready?" Aaron asked. Milan nodded. "We are as ready as we can be, but we must remain alert. They will come again, and we must be prepared." Aaron did not speak again, but she stayed by his side, her presence reassuring. Milan felt a growing bond with her. He realized that their trust and cooperation were becoming the foundation for the village's defense. Without it, survival would be impossible. As Milan lay on his mat later that night, he thought about the day's training. He was tired, but he also felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in a long time. The villagers had learned to fight together, to trust each other, and to act as a single unit. And Aaron, the warrior who had tested him in the cave, had begun to see him as an ally. maybe even a friend. He closed his eyes, listening to the gentle hum of the crystal trees outside. The village was quiet for now, but Milan knew that the true test would come soon. The raiders would return, and when they did, the skills and trust he had helped build would be the key to survival. He felt ready. The night was still and quiet. Milan could hear the soft hum of the crystal forest outside the village, and the faint rustle of leaves as the wind passed through the trees. He checked his small satchel, making sure the few tools and simple weapons he had brought were ready. Erin stood nearby, her spear in hand, scanning the distant hills. "They come soon," Erin said, her voice low but firm. Milan nodded. He had spent days training the villagers, and now it was time to test their skills. The raiders would return, and the village would have to defend itself. The first shadows appeared on the hilltops as the faint glow of the moon lit the landscape. Milan squinted, counting the raiders. There were more than the last attack. At least 30 of them. They moved carefully, spreading out across the hills. But Milan could see their path. He turned to Erin. "Use the traps. Follow the plan," he said quietly. Erin nodded. She moved to the front, signaling to the villagers to take their positions. Milan stayed near the center, ready to support wherever he was needed. The villagers moved like a single unit now. Their confidence had grown, and even the youngest children knew where to hide safely. The first raider stepped onto a hidden tripwire. A small crystal shard spun into the air, clanging against the ground. The raider froze, trying to figure out what had happened. Another raider tripped over a pit covered with branches and leaves, falling hard onto the soft soil. Milan felt a surge of satisfaction. The villagers had executed the traps perfectly. Erin leapt forward with her spear, striking a raider who had tried to flank the village. She moved gracefully, each attack precise and controlled. Milan ran alongside her, using his knife to block and redirect attackers, careful not to hurt the villagers. Together, they created a wall of resistance the raiders had not expected. The raiders were clever and fast. They quickly adjusted, trying to avoid the traps and force their way into the village. Milan shouted directions, guiding the villagers to block paths and use the crystal pillars for cover. They moved in coordinated patterns, pushing back the attackers step by step. One raider lunged toward a group of children hiding near a crystal tree. Milan acted without thinking, intercepting the raider and pushing him back. Erin was right behind him, her spear sweeping to drive another attacker away. The villagers followed their lead, striking quickly and retreating to safety when necessary. The battle raged for hours. The raiders pressed again and again, but each time they met the villagers' coordinated defense, traps slowed them. Alarm systems warned of movement, and Milan and Erin led counterattacks from the flanks. The villagers moved with growing confidence, their fear replaced by determination. At one point, Milan felt a sharp pain in his side. His rib had taken a hard hit when he blocked a raider's swing. He pressed his hand against the injury, grimacing, but did not stop. Erin noticed immediately. She pressed her palm against his ribs, sending the familiar warmth through him. The pain eased enough for him to continue fighting. By midnight, the raiders had grown frustrated. Their formations were broken, and the villagers continued to push them back. One by one, the attackers retreated, disappearing into the shadows of the hills. The villagers cheered softly, careful not to attract attention in case some raiders remained nearby. Milan leaned against a crystal tree, breathing heavily. His body ached, and his ribs throbbed, but he felt a deep sense of relief. The village had survived its first true attack, and the villagers had proven themselves capable of defending their home. Erin walked over to him. Her armor was scratched and dusty, but her expression was calm and focused. She placed her hand on his side again, offering the warmth and relief that had become familiar. Milan gave a small nod of thanks. "You, strong together," she said. Quietly. Milan smiled, exhausted but proud. "You too. Without your skill, we would not have held them." Erin looked at the villagers, who were gathering quietly near the fire, tending to minor injuries and comforting each other. She spoke to Milan again, her tone thoughtful. "They believe now. They trust." Milan nodded. That trust was the most important gift he could have hoped for. The villagers had learned to work together, to follow a plan, and to rely on each other. Their fear had turned into courage, and their courage would protect them in the future. The rest of the night passed quietly. The villagers kept watch in shifts, their eyes alert for any remaining raiders. Milan and Aaron took the first shift, sitting near the edge of the village, watching the hills. The moonlight reflected off the crystal trees, creating a soft, shimmering glow. Milan thought about the days that had brought them here, from the crash to the training. Every step had been difficult. His injury had slowed him, the language had been a barrier, and the villagers had been wary. But each challenge had been met with determination and trust. Erin remained silent for most of the night, but her presence was reassuring. Milan realized that their bond had grown stronger. Through the battle, she had once been a strict and cautious warrior, but now she saw him as an ally and an equal in the defense of the village. As the first light of dawn touched the violet sky, Milan and Erin returned to the village. The villagers were already awake, tending to their homes and checking the traps one last time. There was a sense of calm, a feeling of victory, and a cautious hope for the future. Milan walked through the village, offering words of encouragement and simple guidance. The villagers smiled and nodded, their eyes filled with gratitude. Even the children waved at him from safe spots, no longer hiding in fear. Erin joined him near the center of the village. She held a small crystal in her hand, one of the many used for signaling. She tapped it lightly, then pointed toward Milan. Her meaning was clear. This was a symbol of respect and acknowledgement. Milan smiled faintly and touched the crystal. The warmth of her gesture reminded him of the first time she had touched his ribs, turning what had seemed like hostility into care. He realized that the journey had changed him as much as it had changed the villagers. The village had survived its first true test, but Milan knew the challenges were not over. The raiders would return, and new threats might come from even farther away. But for the first time, he felt confident that together they could face whatever came next. As he lay on his mat that night, listening to the hum of the crystal forest, Milan thought about the gift Erin had given him, not a crystal, not a tool, but the trust and cooperation that had turned fear into courage. He understood now that this was the greatest gift of all, one that would guide them through the trials to come. Milan closed his eyes, knowing that when the next challenge arrived, he would face it not as a lone survivor, but as part of a strong and united village, with Erin and his people standing beside him. The morning sun spread warm light over the village. Milan stretched carefully, feeling the ache in his ribs from the previous night's battle. The pain was still there, but it was bearable. More importantly, he felt a sense of peace. The village had survived, the raiders had retreated, and the villagers were growing stronger and more confident each day. Erin appeared at the edge of the clearing, her spear resting on her shoulder. She looked at Milan with calm intensity. He noticed a faint smile on her lips, something he had rarely seen from her. She motioned for him to follow. Milan limped after her, as she led him toward the outskirts of the village. The villagers were already beginning their daily routines, tending to crops, collecting water, and repairing the small shelters. Even the children moved freely, no longer hiding at the first sight of a stranger. They reached a small hill outside the village, covered in crystal trees that sparkled in the sunlight. At the top of the hill, Erin stopped and gestured for Milan to sit beside her. He lowered himself carefully onto a flat rock, wincing slightly. She did not speak immediately, but sat quietly, watching the village below. After a few moments, Erin took a deep breath and spoke in broken words, clear enough for Milan to understand. "You helped people. You saved them." Milan nodded, feeling a warm sense of pride. "They helped too. I only showed them how. They fought bravely." Arn's eyes softened. She touched his side gently with her palm, the familiar warmth easing the lingering soreness. "Not only ribs," she said, smiling faintly. "Gift of trust. They believe." Milan realized what she meant. The real gift was not the training, the defense, or even survival. It was the trust that had grown between him, Erin, and the villagers. That trust had turned fear into courage, weakness into strength, and strangers into a community. As they watched, the villagers began to gather near the central fire. Milan recognized the subtle signs of celebration, small offerings of fruit, laughter, and shared food. The people were honoring their victory and the bond that had grown from it. Erin pointed to the villagers and then at Milan. Her gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. This was a gift for him too. The villagers had accepted him as one of their own, not just as a helper or a stranger, but as a trusted part of their community. Milan stood slowly, still wincing but feeling stronger than before. He walked down the hill toward the fire, with Erin following close behind. The villagers turned as he approached, their faces bright with smiles and curiosity. Children ran forward, handing him small glowing fruits, and elders nodded in respect. One of the villagers, a tall woman with silver hair, stepped forward and placed a small woven crystal pouch in Milan's hands. Inside were polished stones, each reflecting the colors of the forest. It was a symbol of protection and gratitude, a traditional gift of honor in their culture. Milan felt a deep warmth in his chest as he accepted it. Erin stepped beside him and touched his shoulder lightly. "You, part of village now," she said simply. Milan looked around at the villagers, at their smiles, at the life that thrived despite danger. He realized that this was more than a gift of trust. It was a home, a place where he belonged. The celebration continued into the day. Milan moved among the villagers, sharing small conversations, exchanging smiles, and watching the children play. Erin stayed nearby, observing quietly, but occasionally her expression softened in ways that spoke more than words. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the crystal trees, Milan and Erin returned to the hill outside the village. They sat together in comfortable silence, looking over the people they had helped protect and strengthen. "You've changed," Erin said after a long pause, her voice low but steady. Milan looked at her, puzzled. "Not just fight, heart. Strong, teach care," she explained. Milan realized that she was speaking of more than physical strength. She was acknowledging his courage, his patience, and his ability to inspire trust and hope. It was the greatest recognition he could have received. "I'm only wanted to help," Milan said softly. Erin nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Help became gift. People believe because of you." Milan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The battles, the pain, and the long days of teaching had led to this moment, a moment of connection and acknowledgement. He understood that the true victory was not in defeating the raiders, but in giving the villagers the courage to face challenges together. The night settled over the village. The crystal trees glowed faintly, casting shimmering light on the homes. Below, Milan and Erin stayed on the hill a while longer, watching over the people. There was a sense of peace, a rare calm after so many days of tension and struggle. Finally, Milan turned to Erin. "Thank you for everything, for healing and trust." Erin gave a small smile. "You earned it, not gift only, respect, friendship too." Milan felt a warmth in his chest that went beyond gratitude. It was a feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater than himself. For the first time since he had arrived in this strange world, he felt truly at home. As they descended the hill, Milan noticed how the villagers continued their routines with confidence. Children played without fear, elders worked with calm assurance, and even the warriors moved with coordination and purpose. The village had become stronger, united, and resilient. Milan and Erin stopped near the central fire. The villagers gathered around them, their faces reflecting light from the flames. One of the elders spoke, and though Milan did not understand the words, he could feel the respect and gratitude in the tone. Erin translated as best she could. "They thank you, part of family now." Milan nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. He looked at Erin, then at the villagers, and finally at the small glowing stones in his hand. This was the gift he had never expected: trust, respect, friendship, and a home in a place far from his own world. That night, as Milan lay on his mat in the small shelter, he thought about everything that had happened. The crash, the injury, the struggle to communicate, the battles. In the long days of teaching and preparation, each challenge had been difficult, but each had led to this moment. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the crystal forest outside, the strength of the village around him, and the steady presence of Aaron nearby. He realized that the best gift he had received was not a single object or act, but the trust, friendship, and connection that had grown between him and these people. Milan smiled to himself, knowing that whatever challenges the future held, he would face them with the village and with Aaron by his side. Together, they had survived, learned, and grown stronger. The gift of trust, courage, and belonging would guide them through anything. And for Milan, it was the greatest gift he could ever receive.